All right, Alexander, let's talk about Credit Suisse and the latest bank to be experiencing problems, and it had to get bailed out. We won't call it a bailout, but it had to get bailed out by the central bank in Switzerland. And this is a big one because Signature Bank had about 110 billion in assets. SVB had about 180 billion, I believe, or
Yeah,
200
something
billion,
like that. I think it was,
something
yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Credit Suisse is 580, 600 billion. And I believe this is the first European bank that's come up on the radar. What's going on here?
Well, that's a very good question, and you're absolutely correct. I mean, the other thing to say about Credit Suisse is, of course, it's an old bank. I mean, it's been around for ever since I can remember. I mean, it's a well-established, well-known bank. People in the banking world have heard of it. Even many, many people outside the banking world have heard of it. Whereas, SVB and Signature Bank, well, I'm not saying that they're not important banks, and I'm not saying people haven't heard of them, but, they're not household names in the way that Credit Suisse is. So if Credit Suisse is in trouble, then of course that is something that people will notice. And of course it's now asked for and will probably receive $54 billion in help from the Swiss Central Bank. Now, that is a very large amount of money by any measure. It suggests that there are serious problems within Credit Suisse. There's been rumours that there have been, but this really does look like more than just a bailout. It looks like an attempt to rescue what is in effect a failing bank. And the risk you always run when you do that, when you start putting forward help in this way, and of course Credit Suisse says that they have collateral for all this money, but we don't know what that collateral is, what security they can provide in return for all these loans that they're seeking from the Swiss Central Bank. The problem they have is that, of course, when people see a bank in trouble and they see the central bank moving to support it, and they see sums like this being injected into that bank, unless it immediately restores confidence, unless there's certainty that this is going to be enough, then of course people will say this bank is in very serious trouble, and it will actually accelerate, intensify its problems. And the other risk, of course, is that the bigger the bailout becomes, the more it starts to look like it isn't just that the bank is being bailed out, it's in effect being nationalised. It's been taken over by the Swiss Central Bank entirely, at which point that might start to trigger doubts about the stability of the entire Swiss banking system. And not just the Swiss banking system, because once upon a time, within my lifetime, Swiss banks operated very much in their own ecosystem, their own universe. Today, they're very, very much part of the European banking system altogether, certainly Credit Suisse is, and people are worried, will start to become worried, that the entire European banking system is potentially in trouble. And we've already seen that Christine Lagarde is going around saying, all is well, no cause for concern. There are, however, some problems, and we mustn't be complacent. And of course, what some people may say is they'll look at that, they'll hear that, and they'll start worrying that there are many, many more problems in the European banking system, the European financial system, than the authorities are admitting to. I am going to say straight away, I don't have any information other than what we see in open sources. But we have been following the situation in Europe now for years. And I think we can say with confidence, based on what we have always known, there are serious problems in the European financial system. If a bank like Credit Suisse fails or has to be nationalized to prevent it failing, then the risks of something going seriously wrong are going to grow, and we could very well find ourselves in a full financial crisis.
Yeah. Too big to fail. Credit Suisse comes to mind when you think of that.
Yeah,
phrase,
exactly.
Too big to fail. I
Exactly.
mean, it's such a big bank for Europe, especially, but all over the world. Actually, I mean, it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. Exactly.
The Saudis were actually called in to help bail out Credit Suisse. They balked. They said, "Not our problem." Even though they have something like, I don't know, I've read like 8% of Credit Suisse. I'm not sure the exact number, but the Saudis, they said we're not going to bail it out, and it was left to the government, to the central bank to bail it out. I was thinking this morning, how much time did the central bank actually buy Credit Suisse? 1 month, 2 months, 3 months? And how much time did it buy for all of Europe, all of the EU banks? Because things aren't going to get easier for Europe. Things are going to get much, much harder from an economic standpoint. That's the way Europe has set itself up to move in the next couple of years. They've done this to themselves.
Absolutely. And of course, the other thing to say is, of course, if there's a financial crisis in Europe, it will spread to many more places. It's difficult to see, despite what people are saying, how it can avoid spreading eventually to the United States as well. But can I just say, first of all, why didn't the Saudis act? After all, they are the biggest single shareholder. And one can only assume that they've opened the lid and looked inside and haven't liked what they've seen. And that seems to me the only explanation for why they wouldn't act to protect what is, after all, a big investment by them. I mean, one would prefer always, in a situation where a business is in trouble, one would look to the shareholders first, if you like, to sort of provide any extra money. If your biggest shareholder is not prepared to do that, that is not a sign of confidence. That is a sign of a total lack of confidence. It suggests that the shareholder doesn't think that there's very much going right with this particular business. So, just saying. So, I mean, the fact that the Saudis refuse to provide funding is a big thing. Maybe all kinds of reasons for it, but it is a big thing. But you're absolutely right. The problems in the European banking system are huge. I've heard all kinds of very disturbing stories about the state of many of the Italian banks. I've heard many disturbing stories about the state of many of the German banks, including some of the smaller German banks, the Volksbank and all of those. I mean, I can't again confirm that is the case, and I don't want to say any particular bank is in trouble. I don't want to be put in that position of suggesting those things. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there are these problems. They are systemic. And why are they so bad? It is because ever since the 2008 financial crisis, the Europeans have simply kicked the can down the road. They've never really acted to solve their underlying problems. They've always carried out pasting up the problems, applying sellotape to them. The Germans have never been happy with the Eurobond idea, probably just for them that they didn't go down that route, because had they done so, it would have been a huge problem for them actually now, because all the problems would have transmitted themselves back to Germany. I can imagine that over the next few weeks and months, if the crisis deepens, we will see the Eurobond idea resurrect itself. There will be enormous pressures on the Germans at that point to do that. But of course, as I said, I think there are problems within the German banking system as well. And given that the financial situation in Germany is not strong, given that the economy is probably in recession, I have to say that the idea that the German people are going to rush to embrace Eurobonds and are going to rush to support banks in Italy and France and wherever else, I think that's frankly going to be an extremely hard sell indeed, and quite possibly an impossible one. And besides, I don't think it ultimately solves the problem.
I look at the leadership in the EU, and I don't think any of them can solve this problem.
No, I
I
agree.
mean, this is going to get, yeah, the Lagarde, Ursula, Michel. Who's going to solve this problem?
Well, and Macron.
And I don't even know how
leaders.
much further they can kick the can down the road either.
Well, I
mean, I
well,
think
exactly.
they've kicked it as far as it can go.
Well, exactly. I mean, if you look at the others, I mean, Macron, he's got a major problem with the pension reform that he's trying to enact. It's far from clear that it's going to pass the French Parliament. If it doesn't pass the French Parliament, I mean, he's a lame duck leader and he's deeply unpopular. And of course, Scholz runs a fractious, fragmented coalition. There was an article in the Financial Times just a few days ago saying that relations within the coalition have become poisonous, that the Free Democrats who run the finance ministry have come to loathe the Greens, and that the two parties are almost in constant battles now, not by the way over sanctions, but other things. And of course the SPD, which is supposed to be the leading party in the coalition, is also in serious difficulties. So, a weak government in Germany, led by an unconvincing and weak chancellor, a president in France who, frankly, has lost control of his own agenda, a commission that is led by deeply inadequate people. I mean, very polite to Ursula here. I'm sure you could come up with much stronger words. You certainly could, Alex, come up with much stronger words to describe her. And a governor of the European Central Bank who has failed at everything she has undertaken. I mean, everything she's touched has turned to dust, which is probably why she became governor of the European Central Bank in the first place. So, I mean, the whole thing looks like an absolute mess, and the problems are enormous. And, this could very well be the precipitating event that brings the whole thing tumbling down. It might be.
And I have to add, you also have a leadership in Europe across the board, which seems very disinterested in solving financial problems, and they're absolutely interested in pouring more money into Ukraine.
Well, indeed, exactly. That is entirely true. That is their major focus. That's their obsession. That's the matter that they're talking about all the time. Apparently business leaders come along and they meet with people like Ursula, and all they hear about is Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. And you're absolutely correct about this. And of course, Ukraine is something they think they can sort of understand because they're ideologues, they're not technicians. They don't really understand much about all the things we're talking about. And of course, they're now confronted with the problem. They don't really understand. That's far outside their sort of personal comfort zones. And of course, the system, the EU system now, has become so complicated and so unwieldy that hammering together a compromise, especially with our Angela Merkel, who's always the keystone to the arch, if you like, but she's no longer there. It's going to be incredibly difficult. And there's no one obvious to take her place. And given the problems that we're now starting to see grow, one wonders whether even Angela Merkel could have really, overcome the kind of problems that we might be seeing. I mean, to my mind, if Credit Suisse fails, we are probably in a financial crisis. I mean, they have to stop it at Credit Suisse. If Credit Suisse fails and then other banks start to become affected, then I mean I think that we will see a loss of confidence, and in banking, confidence is all. If that goes, then as I said, we will see a major financial crisis across the union.
Yeah, but for Credit Suisse, they have to prevent the bank run now. They have
Yeah.
to instill confidence in the customer base, in the depositors,
Yes.
and they have to prevent the bank run.
Yes. Yes.
That's where they are right now.
That's exactly where they are. Exactly. So, of course, that's what I mean. So, if you put out $54 billion, what you're telling the depositors is that this bank is out of money. It's almost 10% of its value. So that, far from reassuring people, might alarm them even more. And then, of course, you could do what Yellen and Powell have just done in the United States and say, well, deposits, they're 100% insured. We are prepared to cover them entirely. So you don't need to take your money out, because if the bank collapses, then we'll pay all your money. But at that point, you have in effect nationalised the bank. I mean, that's the thing to understand. And if you're nationalising one bank, are you standing by every other? At which point,
Yes.
if you are, you are, and if you are, and if there are problems, then of course there are problems in the financial system which are greater than one bank, that might be systemic. Then those systemic problems are yours, the government's problems, and that might start to have effects on other parts of the financial system, such as the sovereign bond market and all of that. So you can see how it can move from one point in the financial system to another, and it very, very easily get out of control.
Yeah, when it gets out of control, it moves very fast.
That's the other thing, exactly. That's the other thing. You can very, very easily find yourself running to after a runaway train and never being able to catch up on it. Or basically, or perhaps a better metaphor, trying to run ahead of a tidal wave, which, believe me, can't be done.
Yeah, and if this spreads to Europe, and the EU decides to do what Yellen and Powell and Biden and all these guys did, which is to just basically guarantee that every depositor is okay. I mean, can you imagine this on an EU level?
Well, exactly. That's the point. And who would provide that guarantee? The European Central Bank?
Lagarde?
No, but who stands behind the European Central Bank? Ultimately, European governments, but there's only one that matters: Germany in the end. So it would all feed back to Germany. Germany would, at that point, be in a position where it was backstopping everybody. I mean, literally everybody who has a bank account, if you think about it, across the Union. Can Germany do that?
And it wouldn't stop the Italians, the Greeks, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French. It wouldn't stop people from saying, you know what, I don't care if you're guaranteeing the money.
No.
I'm pulling my money out.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's
and there you're left with the nuclear option, which is okay, you have the nationalization, you have your backstop of the deposits, but the only option that's left to you is capital controls. That's it.
Yes.
To prevent the bank. I mean, if it gets to that level, that is your only option.
Yes, which of course at that point collapsed the system. I mean, they imposed capital controls on Greece, as you remember, during the aftermath of the 2008 crisis, about the time of the referendum and all that. In Greece, there was the bailout, that big bailout. But Greece is small. If you do this across the entire system, then the Eurozone essentially has fragmented and will start to collapse.
I think they'll contain it at Switzerland. I don't know. Something's telling me
Yeah,
they're
they're going to do
a
everything.
little bit more
Yeah.
time.
Yes,
Yeah.
they're going to do everything they can to contain it in Switzerland, and we're going to see every step possible taken to plug whatever holes there are. And we've been hearing for some time there've been problems with Credit Suisse, but it may be that their problems are not just at Credit Suisse. That's the trouble. You see, the thing about the Swiss banking system, which I think a lot of people don't understand, and which I came to realise many years ago, is that, yes, you do have some fairly big Swiss banks, Credit Suisse being one. Most banks in Switzerland are pretty small institutions. And if there's a problem, an institution, a problem in a bank that is institutionally important to the whole system, then I can easily see how it could transmit itself right across the entire banking system within Switzerland. And because that is so interconnected with the European system, it could easily run out of control. So it may not be an easy thing to stop this at source, but that's, I think, what they're going to try to do. And we're going to hear all kinds of comments over the next few days and weeks about how there's no cause for concern, Switzerland is stable, the financial system there is stable, all is well. They'll plug all the holes, they've got all the funds, they'll do whatever it takes, that famous expression. And maybe it will work. I mean, sometimes it has done. But sometimes with financial markets, precisely when they hear those things, what it does is that it makes them think, makes players in those markets think that the situation is even worse than the authorities are saying, and that makes them pull out. And that can happen too. Bank runs are extraordinary things. When they happen, as you correctly say, they happen incredibly fast and they run out of control.
And today it happens within a second. The minute the bank decides to shut everything down, it's just one
Exactly.
pressing of the keyboard, and that's it. Everyone's
And
stuck.
that's it, exactly. Absolutely. I mean, it's not like the old days when you had to queue up outside to take your money out in cash. Today it happens literally at the blinking of an eye with, electronic transfers and all that. Of course, if you stop them, if you try and slow them down, if you try and do all those sorts of things, then that can actually intensify the panic.
So, Kremlin spokesman, final thought, Dmitry Peskov, he said that the sanctions against Russia, the financial sanctions, were a blessing in disguise. It insulated Russia from any of the banking contagion. Those were the words he used.
Yeah, he did.
A blessing in disguise.
Absolutely. And he may very well be right. And by the way, there's been a lot more news about the Russian economy. We had a whole slew of inflation statistics coming out, and the Prime Minister, Mercouris, now says that the current rate of inflation is below 4%, so it's all the way down. So and the demand is rising, and industrial production is rising, and all of that. So, now, can I just say about Russia? I mean, they're in a much stronger position than they were in 2008. In 2008, the Russian financial system hardly existed. It was basically a branch of the global financial system. And when there was the global financial crisis in 2008, what happened was all the banks withdrew their money from Russia to recapitalize in the West, and lots of depositors were a huge threat, and the Russian central bank had to intervene to sort of prevent a collapse of the ruble and the entire financial system, and the country lost a huge proportion of its reserves. And as I very, very well remember, the entire economy, this is in 2008, entire Russian economy came within visible distance of implosion. I mean, that actually did happen in 2008. Today, it's completely different. They've reorganized their financial system. They've got a much stronger financial system than they had then. They've got the sanctions, which, as Peskov says, has cut them off from direct links with the Western financial system. They've got capital controls. An important fact, which we shouldn't overlook, they've got a much more controlled currency than they did actually in those days. You couldn't do what what you did then, which is just go out and try and change all your money into dollars and take it out of the country. You can't do that today. So Peskov is probably right. But I'm going to say this: if we have a global financial crisis on the scale of 2008, then I can't believe that any big economy, or indeed any economy, is going to be completely unaffected. And that includes Russia's. And I mean, we're already seeing, however, the last couple of days, oil prices are slipping again. And that's because people are now really worried about, what's going to happen going forward. So Peskov is right. They'll come through. It won't be the blow for them that it was in 2008, but it will cause them difficulties. And I think that it's too complacent to say, well, because we're sanction-proof, that means that we are global financial crisis-proof as well. They'll be able to cope with it. They'll come through it. They'll probably come through it a lot better than people like, the Western countries, some Western countries will. But as I said, it's not as if it won't have any effect on them at all.
All right, theduran.locals.com. We are on Rumble as well, and Rockfin, and go to the Duran shop. 10% off. Use the code. Good day. Take care.